How's everybody doing this morning? Good to see you guys all. Anybody been sick? Yeah, it's like that season. Like I've been sick all last week, but thank God I feel better. I told Jeff that was just here that I had a sore throat over the last few days and thought, oh no, what if I can't do this? And Jeff was like, no. So we're going to do this. So many of you guys know some of my story, and today I'm going to share just a little bit more of that and how my dad kind of impacted my fatherhood, my ability to lead my family, and maybe just my prayer is that something speaks to you today. I'm not going to call anybody out specifically, but today's kind of more pointed towards the men of the family. So if you're a man, a grandfather, a son, a grandson, and hope to have a family one day, or already do, this is for you. You know, this is not to minimize the importance of motherhood, because we all needed one to get here, obviously, and moms are so important. But this is about fathers, mostly. You know, I used to work for the county of Merced, and every year we had a fatherhood event. It was to celebrate fatherhood. And, you know, the dads would come and they would get gifts, they would get resources, and inevitably we would have single mothers show up. And one of the things that they would all say is, I'm the mom and the dad. And I would say, that's wonderful, but I would say, you can't be the dad. You're an amazing mother. But only dads can be dads. And, you know, and so when we're missing that, then it definitely affects the family. So, you know, growing up, my mom was married to my dad for a few years and had 3 sons. My dad was very violent. He was into drugs, he was an alcoholic, and he was extremely violent man. So my mom left. Thank God my mom left when we were little. My dad then went and had a second family where I had 3, more brothers and sisters, half brothers and sisters, and a stepsister who I love dearly. We love each other. We visit each other when we can. You know, they're some were in Hawaii, and I'll talk about how I got to hang out with my little brother there a little bit. And then he had a 3rd son from a 3rd woman who had very little, if any, interaction with him. We saw pictures of him being my youngest brother or half-brother when he was really little with the family, so we know he was there. But then as we grew up as brothers and sisters, we didn't know that he existed until probably, I would say, 3.5 to 4 years ago, when his wife reached out because he wanted to find his dad and his family. And so they reached out, they found us, and we have a great relationship. Unfortunately, he didn't get to meet his dad because my dad had already passed away at that time. But when I've shared my story, you know, I've shared that probably one of the most influential people in my life was my grandfather, who took me in when I was 12 years old. I had already been arrested, committed a crime, and, was heading down a bad path. And my mom's dad took me in, gave me a job, taught me about responsibility, taught me about work ethic, showed me love, showed me compassion, and was always there for me. So I would say that he was the most influential person in my life. I would say that. But I was thinking about that as I was kind of writing today's sermon, thinking about, was he really the most influential person in my life? Well, if that was the case, then I would have, as I was growing up, becoming a young father, having a family, that I would have modeled what he taught me, if he was really that influential to me. Would that make sense? You would think so. But why then did I turn out like my father and not my grandfather? Why did I end up that way? We went to, we were blessed to be able to take a trip to Maui like about a month ago. And my brother that lives in Maui, it was great. We hung out almost all week. He took us to see all these things. But one of the most important nights was a night where me and him were just sitting at the table and we were talking about life. And I had always assumed I had this little grudge against my little brother because I always thought that he had it easier and that he was Dad's favorite because all we would ever hear about was Josh this, Josh that, Josh this, Josh that. And Josh is a good guy. I mean, he's been in the military for over 20 years. He's done good things with his life. But I was always just a little bit jealous of him because maybe he got the better influence of our father. Maybe. I don't know because I didn't grow up too much with my dad. As a matter of fact, when we would go visit him every summer, I would avoid my dad. I didn't really care too much for my dad at that point. I would rather hang out with my grandparents because they were fun, and my dad was still alcoholic, still fighting, still doing all of these things. So I told my brother, I said, you were clearly the favorite son. You had it so much better. And he said, no, I didn't. Dad was just as bad to me. And my brother went through 20-something years of alcohol abuse, anger issues, all the same things that me and my first few brothers modeled, he did too. And even though my youngest brother really didn't spend a lot of time with my father, when he would come with his wife and his family and his kids, I could see my dad in him, not just physically, but in the way that he talks to and treats his kids, the way he talks to and treats his wife. It was clear that we were all really, really influenced by our dysfunctional father. Even though we were raised in different environments, his dysfunction became our dysfunction. And there's no telling if he didn't get his, because I didn't know his dad until he was already older by the time he was my grandfather. But I had been told stories of my grandfather being very similar to my dad. Same, domestic violence still, same anger issues, same alcohol abuse, all of the same things that my grandfather had. He passed along to my father, that passed along to me and my brothers. And now if we're not careful, we'll pass them along to my kids too. Because I believe the influence of dysfunction far outweighs any other influence that we have. The negative things that we learn, that we see, that we experience, in early childhood are just ingrained into us, and we have to really work hard to become aware of those things in order to begin to change those things for our children and our children's children and our children's children's children. And if we're not intentional about that, then the thing that we really leave them is dysfunctional. And so my question to you is, well, maybe I'll only raise my hand, is how is your parents? How is your current family? Would you say they are completely healthy, or would you say that they are dysfunctional? And today is about bringing an awareness to that, so that way we can change it. It's not to say and point people out and say, ha, 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 you're just as dysfunctional as we are. It's to say, wait a minute. If I can start to see and recognize a pattern of behaviors, maybe I can do something to stop this. That's mine and my wife's prayer. That's mine and my wife's parenting, for little Adam. That, when Adam was born, one thing me and my wife really talked about, and she's the one who said it, and I'm completely on board and believe this as well, is if you guys were here a few months ago, my wife shared her testimony of her childhood being molested by her father, being beaten, watching the domestic abuse, all of these things. And her childhood was rotten. It was terrible. And then I've shared my story over the last few years, or 7 years that I've been here. And mine was better than hers, but it wasn't perfect either. I can't even imagine what hers is like. But one thing that she told me as we became, and let me back up. She has a daughter from a previous marriage, and I have 6 children from 2 previous marriages. So Adam is the one that we have together. And one thing that she told me was, she said, maybe even for our own healing as parents, that watching Adam be raised in a loving Christian home will give us, the parents, the opportunity to experience through Adam what a healthy child might have looked like. And to be able to heal ourselves from our past through Adam's eyes. But in order to do that, then we've got to become honest with ourselves, and are we really leading him in a healthy or towards a healthy lifestyle, which is about awareness. So it's funny as you prepare for sermons like this, how, God calls you out. He says to you, no, Rueben, this is about you. This is about where you're falling short. So as I go through today's sermon, which is going to talk about dysfunction, a lot of it that I wrote was things that I could see in myself even through this story. And so what my prayer is that you would be open and honest and have ears to hear and be honest with yourselves, both fathers and mothers. And if you're not a father and mother yet, that you would just take this in, and that way maybe you can heal your dysfunction before becoming a father. I know your children will be grateful for that. Because my children, I don't remember if I shared about a month ago, my daughter who's over here in childcare working, she was at our house and we were having a barbecue and she's playing with Adam in the backyard. Now this daughter's 25, Adam's 4. They've experienced me at 2 completely different times of my life, and Vanessa, she's holding Adam, and they're playing, and I'm about maybe 7-8 feet away at the barbecue, and she tells Adam, she says, Adam, my dad, same dad, but she's experienced seeing 2 different dads. She says, my dad wasn't a very good dad. My dad was a drug addict. My dad was a gang member. My dad was in and out of jail. My dad made us lose homes and have to go move over and over again, made us have to live with my grandmother. My dad was never around. She said, but your dad, she said, you've got a good dad. Look at this home. My kids never had a stable home growing up, but he's like, your dad owns this house or is buying this house. Your dad is a pastor at a church. Look at all that you have. You got the better dad. And it really kind of shook me a little bit, to be honest with you, that it made me stop cooking. I don't remember if I burned the chicken from there, which happens pretty regularly with chicken in me. But, I stopped for a moment and I looked at her and I said, Vanessa, I loved you the same as I do Adam. I mean, with the same amount of love, everything I had. But at the time, I didn't have the tools that I have now. So yes, I am a different father. But that doesn't take away how much I loved you growing up. I just didn't have the tools to love you well. I was messed up inside. I was, selfish. If it came to my drug abuse, I chose that over raising a family. I chose running around and making mistakes rather than raising children. All of these things that I did were because of the tools I didn't have. I was trying to do fathering with the information that I knew that was being funneled through this funnel of dysfunction that my father had shown me, and I just passed that along. but we're being very intentional with our honesty with ourselves, in particular me as a father and as a man in the house, to try to become a better husband and a better father and hopefully a better grandfather. I do have grandchildren, and if I'm honest, I have some that I don't see. Because of how terrible of a father that I had been, I have my two oldest children don't speak to me. And it breaks my heart because I pray about that every day and I think about them every day. But the amount of things that they felt from me growing up have pushed them away from me, and with them, 2 grandchildren. So I keep praying, and if you guys ever stop and pray for me, about me, pray that God would heal that relationship. But that's to tell you that you've got to do something about it before it's too late. Because the damage you do can send your kids running away. And I haven't really spoken to those kids for probably 10 years. And it hurts. It hurts. So let's talk about today, first of all, what is dysfunction? The dictionary defines dysfunction as the condition of having poor and unhealthy behaviors and attitudes within a group of people. For example, family dysfunction. It's about unhealthy behaviors, unhealthy attitudes, and the unhealthy part of it is just not being aware, not facing that. So again, if you're brave, how many of you belong to a dysfunctional family? How many of you are leading a dysfunctional family? Oh, look at the hands go down. Come on, let's be honest. That's not my family. Well, a woman named Mary Carr says a dysfunctional family is any family with more than one person in it. So how many of you have more than one person in your family? Hey, way more hands go up. Chances are that you have some form of dysfunction going on in your family. And we'll talk about that and how to begin to have healthy habits in order to have a healthy family. And these are about ourselves. Stephen Ford just says it this way. He says, we all come from dysfunctional families. So the issue is not whether our family was dysfunctional, but whether we can put meaning to the experience of our lives. So we can't change the past. I mean, if we were raised in a dysfunctional family, most of us probably were. But could we find meaning? Can we find understanding? And can we change those experiences for our children and our children's children is the thing. And there was another quote that says, while every family has problems, the difference between normal dysfunction and trauma is a pattern of unhealthy behavior without awareness. It's being without awareness is where the trauma happens, because then you just continue to feed that dysfunction, feed that dysfunction, feed that dysfunction, feed that dysfunction, and then you end up growing up with a trauma in your life. So again, today my prayer is for me, my prayer is for you, is just to become aware of, we're going to talk about the fruits of dysfunction. How does that pop up? And we're going to be able to see it in the story of Genesis 34. So that's a very long scripture, so I didn't put it on the screen to save the tech team from having to do so many notes, so I'm going to read it to you. And as I read it to you, I want you to think more about the father's dysfunction in this story, because it's a trauma-based story, and I don't want us to lose the impact of what Jacob did or did not do, because Jacob, as we know, is the leader at this point of his family. He's the man of the house, and one thing that we need to learn as young men and young women, and something that I say pretty candidly to people that come into my office to talk about families, talk about, marriage, talk about, all these things because, as the family pastor here, my whole heart is to make the family unit healthy. So I get a lot of families that come in to talk. And I'll look at the man, and I'll look at the woman, and I'll just say flat out, being a man in the house is not as the same as being a man of the house. Those are two different things. Just because you're there doesn't make you automatically the man of the house. There's things that come with that. And if we began to understand that, we would be better. We would have healthier relationships. There would be standards. There would be all of these things happening. So let's look at the story. But before we do, I only want to go over rule number 1, because I don't like going over all the rules. I know Jeff probably will frown when I say that. But it's important to know that even though the Bible was written for me, it wasn't written to me. It means that I should learn something from this story, because this story reflects me. The story shows, in many of these stories, it shows how humans are. You read these stories and you think, oh my gosh, how were they like that? And we'll talk about a few of the characters as we go through this that we have already learned about. Man, they're messed up, you think. But it's more a reflection of our nature, who we are. So as we read through this, remember, I want you to consider Jacob in this story, okay? So it starts off, and I'll read the whole chapter because it's all very important. It says, "Now Dinah, the daughter Leah had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the women of the land. When Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, the ruler of that area, saw her, he took her and raped her. His heart was drawn to Dinah, daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. And Shechem said to his father Hamor, 'Get me this girl as my wife.' When Jacob heard that his daughter Dinah had been defiled, his sons were in the fields with his livestock, so he did nothing about it until they came home. Then Shechem's father Hamor went out to talk with Jacob. Meanwhile, Jacob's sons had come in from the fields as soon as they heard what had happened. They were shocked and furious because Shechem had done an outrageous thing in Israel by sleeping with Jacob's daughter, a thing that should not be done. But Hamor said to them, 'My son Shechem has his heart set on your daughter. Please give her to him as his wife. Intermarry with us. Give us your daughters and take our daughters for yourselves. You can settle among us. The land is open to you. Live in it, trade in it, and acquire property in it.' Then Shechem said to Dinah's father and brothers, 'Let me find favor in your eyes, and I will give you whatever you ask. Make the price for the bride and the gift I am to bring as great as you like. I'll pay whatever you ask me. Only give me the young woman as my wife.' Because their sister Dinah had been defiled, Jacob's sons replied deceitfully as they spoke to Shechem and his father Hamor. They said to them, 'We cannot do such a thing. We can't give our sister to a man who is not circumcised. That would be a disgrace to us. We will enter into an agreement with you on one condition only, that you become like us by circumcising all your males. Then we will give you our daughters and take your daughters for ourselves. We'll settle among you and become one people with you. But if you will not agree to be circumcised, we'll take our sister and go.' Their proposal seemed good to Hamor and his son Shechem. The young man, who was the most honored of all his father's family, lost no time in doing what they said because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. So Hamor and his son Shechem went to the gate of their city to speak to the men of their city. 'These men are friendly towards us,' they said. 'Let them live in our land and trade in it. The land has plenty of room for them. We can marry their daughters and they can marry ours. But the men will agree to live with us as one people only on the condition that our males be circumcised, as they themselves are. Won't their livestock, their property, and all their animals become ours? So let us agree to the terms, and they will settle among us. All the men went out to the city gate, agreed with Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male in the city was circumcised. 3 days later, while all of them were still in pain, two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and attacked the unsuspecting city, killing every male. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword and took Dinah from Shechem's house and left. The sons of Jacob came upon the dead bodies and looted the city where their sister had been defiled. They seized their flocks and herds and donkeys and everything else of theirs in the city and out in the fields. They carried off all their wealth and all their women and children, taking as plunder everything in their houses. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me obnoxious to the Canaanites and Perizzites, the people living in this land. We are few in number, and if they join forces against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed." But they replied, "Should he have treated our sister like a prostitute?" So that's a big, long story. A lot had happened in there. A lot. And you think about, like, why would that story be there? What is important about that story? Well, there's two things that are important to understand. One is, like 2 Timothy says, that all Scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, training in righteousness, so that the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. So it's there for a purpose. And like I said earlier, the two things is it shows us how we are as humans, and we can definitely learn from negative behaviors. That's the goal. We could see where Father came up short, and hopefully we can see that in ourselves where we might come up short and be able to become aware and address those things. And the other sad part is, as I read through it, man, it's almost like I'm becoming desensitized because the story should have been tragic. It should have been made you angry. But we as humans were becoming more and more desensitized. We see this stuff on TV all the time. So this is like a story that could have been made for a movie that we've already seen. And so my heart for you is that you don't become desensitized and miss the point today. So the key to learn today is this, that Jacob's dysfunction is our dysfunction. We have the same dysfunction as Jacob. And so I'll do a quick little recap of that story. We have Jacob, whose youngest daughter, probably 14 or 15 years old, goes off into the city of Shechem to go see what these women are doing. Now, there's no indication whether or not Dad said, "Hey, go ahead and go," or that she had been there before. We don't know that. But she goes off and she, somebody that sees her and is enamored with her, takes her, rapes her, decides to marry her. Chances are she was probably kidnapped because later on it says that they went into the house and took her back. So we don't know if she was kidnapped or she was there against her will or she went willingly. We don't know. But Dad finds out about this and, doesn't do anything at first. The sons come, they get really angry. They hatch a plan. The sons hatch a plan to deceive these people. It says they did it deceitfully. We already know that Jacob was deceitful. We already know what his deceit brought. And so then they hatch this plan to come up and, use their faith to convince these people that they would get along well, that they would work this out, knowing darn well that that was never the thought, never the plan. And then while these men agreed to this, they decide to go kill all the men, take all the women, do all of this terrible stuff. Dad finds out and he says, "Woe is me, what about me in this?" Without much concern that his kids had just gone and killed a whole city of people, was more concerned about how it was going to affect him. And that's where the story ends. And then we're going to get into the next story in a little bit. But what was Jacob's problem? And what might be ours as fathers and men? Well, the first problem that I saw that I kind of pulled from a few scriptures back was, to me, he had first of all, was a half-hearted commitment that he had to God. And do we have half-hearted commitments as men to our families too? And I'll explain this. If we go back quite a few chapters, the question would have to be, one, why was Jacob in Shechem in the first place? Why was he there? He was never told to stop in Shechem. Way back in 18, that God says, I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Remember, he has that dream, and he encounters God, and God says, this is where I will bless you. And we know that Jacob had to go on a journey to heal his relationship with his brother. But then in verse 15, he says, I will bring you back to this land. He's bringing him back to Bethel. He had promised to give him land. Instead, he stops, and it says he purchases this property in Shechem. Shechem was kind of a port town. It was a busy town. It was comfortable to him. He found comfort there. He thought he was going to become successful. But that was not the place that God had told him to go. So in all the things that Jacob had done well following God's lead, this one was not one of them. He stopped short. He just, I don't know, it's like I believe that sometimes it'll be our own comfort that will stop us from achieving God's complete plan in our lives. How many times have we allowed comfort to stop us? Whether it's comfort at your job, I'm not going to do any extra, I'm not going to go look for a new job, I'm not going to pursue further education, I'm not going to do all of these things. I find comfort sitting on my couch, so I'm not going to walk 8 feet to go exercise because of my comfort. So the first thing he did, to me, was have a half-hearted commitment, and now would be an appropriate time to think about, where am I not fully committed? If I was to ask you, what's the 3 most important things in your life, you might say, my God, my family, and then myself. But later on, we're going to look at, is that really your 3 priorities, or are they mixed up somewhere? So we're going to talk about priorities. And when we think about our half-hearted commitments, think about what Hebrews 12 says. Hebrews 12, verse 1 says, let us throw off everything that hinders. Think about that. Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. He clearly says there's things that hinder us that may not be sinful. He's talking about the things that keep us from completing the plan that God has for our lives. And he's saying it's like a race. We got to throw all these things. If you think about, if you're trying to run a marathon and you have a backpack full of stuff that's hindering you from running because it's full of things that you're comfortable with, it could be, for me, it could be sports, that keep me from fully committing. Remember, I told you guys I used to come to Saturday night service because Sunday was for the NFL. That's why I came to Yosemite Church. They had a Saturday night service so I could sit and watch football on Sunday. I thought that was the most important thing. Could it be, if you're young, it could be gaming. It could be unhealthy friendships. It can be all of these things. What it's saying is anything that hinders you from fully following God, it's like he's saying take it and throw it off. It's not saying take it and look through it and kind of make decisions what pieces of those you're keeping. He's literally saying get rid of all of those things and run with perseverance. So think about your commitments. Even as fathers, where do we fall short? I get home at the end of the day, and I can be just checked out. I'm tired. I'm mentally drained. all I want to do is sit on the couch and do nothing for a little while. But I got a little son, who looks forward to Daddy getting home every day so we could play. His favorite game is Keepy Uppy. Getting the balloon and just hitting it back and forth to one another, or playing Chutes and Ladders or something like that. And I'll be like, no, I don't want to play. I'm comfortable right here. And I'm thinking about my childhood, those first years are so important, and I've learned through reading that this is an extra credit thing. When your kids get older and you wonder why they don't talk to you about important stuff, it goes back to when they were little with the balloon kind of thing, because what you've taught them is the things that are important to them are not important to you. When your son wants to show you something, Dad, look at this, is super cool, this is super fun, will you play with me? And you tell him no, you've just told him that the things that are most important to him are just not important to you. So then they become teenagers, they become young adults, and things that are important to them are not going to be important to Mom and Dad. So I'm just not going to share them. Because we've taught them that. We've taught them. So check where your commitment is. The second thing that I found in that, and this is probably the one that I am probably most guilty of, is it shows up in the passiveness in the face of crisis. Verse 5 says, when Jacob had heard his daughter Dinah had been defiled, his sons were in the field with the livestock, so he did nothing. He did nothing. I don't know if he didn't know what to do. He was afraid of what to do. I don't know. It doesn't really say it, but to me it was clear that he did nothing. So being passive, this is probably one of my biggest challenges for myself, because I've gone so far from being aggressive and trying not to do that I've gone all the way to the other end where maybe I just don't want to be involved. Talk to your mom about it. Figure it out. This doesn't have much to do with me. Hands off. Make your own mistakes, kid. You made your mistakes, deal with your mistakes. When your kids may be looking to you to help them, to guide them, to do something, but you're just so passive and hands off. And that's what we saw in Jacob. He was just hands off. How do I know he was hands off? Because of the next point. Oh, wait, let me go back. Proverbs 18:9 says, a passive man is actively involved in his own destruction. A passive man is actually actively involved in his own destruction. So what's the third thing that he did? How do I know that he was passive? Because he abdicated his responsibilities. He's the leader of this house. I don't care, if you're the leader of the family, how old your kids get. You're still the leader of the family. They still look up to you. It's still your responsibility to lead your family well. How do we know that he abdicated? Because in verse 16 it says, because their sister Dinah had been defiled, Jacob's sons replied deceitfully as they spoke. Dad was there. It says he was there. But why did he then say, let his sons then go ahead and hatch this plan? Why didn't he say, hey, this isn't a good idea? Why didn't he say, that this man who had encountered and said he came face to face with God, he had wrestled with God, he understood what God wanted for him and his family, yet he let his kids decide what to do? He abdicated his parental responsibilities. Ephesians 6 verse 4 in the Message, I think, says it well, what he should have done, what us fathers should do. It says, fathers, don't exasperate your children by coming down hard on them. Take them by the hand and lead them in the way of the master. That's our job. When we see our kids or we have parenting things that come at us and we don't know how to face them, we use our own understanding, our own knowledge, our own dysfunction. It says, here, let's go together and let's seek God in this. I'm not going to let you take over the children and my role. But my role as a father is to go to seek God in this. So I'm going to take you by the hand, and we're going to follow God together in this. And we're going to see what God has to say. But he didn't do that. Probably the biggest thing that he did, and the thing that stuck out to me, was number 4. Now, this is more of a new pop culture type of word, is this victim mentality, which it says he equates to like narcissistic behavior. It's all about me. It's all about me. And I'm not saying that people that are victims of certain things, that it's not, I'm not minimizing victims of trauma. I'm really not. But where it shows up in this story is when Jacob, after all of the stuff that had occurred, all of the things that his kids had gone and done, it says, then Jacob said to Simeon, Levi, you have brought trouble on me. It was about him at that point. No concern about all the harm that his kids had done, that they were deceitful to this whole plan. They had hatched this terrible idea of a plan, gone out and murdered this whole population of men, took all of their belongings, took everything they had, and Dad says, but what about me? What about me? There's a quote that says, the victim stance is a powerful one. The victim is always morally right, neither responsible, not accountable, and forever entitled to sympathy. I don't know if you guys have parents like that or you are a parent like that. But that's very harmful to children. It's very harmful to children. If you think about it and you kind of dwell on it for a moment, imagine going to a parent and saying that they hurt you or that you were upset with them. And instead of taking accountability on that, they get mad at you for being mad at them. And say, how can you be mad at me? How could you hurt me? And what does that do to a young child? It makes them emotionally withdrawn. Why even go to express what's going on with me if it's just ultimately going to be about you anyway? You're emotionally hindering your children. It happens. It's real. And again, that's not to say if you're going through and you're healing from trauma and all of that kind of thing. God bless you. I hope you find healing. Like my wife is still working on healing 30 years later. But this is just to show from this story what that can tend to do and how it shows up. So what is missing from that entire chapter? What was missing from all of chapter 34 that we have seen through other stories like Abraham's story? There was something clearly missing when they were processing all this information. I'll give you the answer. God was missing. In all of chapter 34, there is no mention of God at all. There was no praying to God. There was no seeking God in any of this. Just like when Abraham and Sarah were making this plan for him to go sleep with the slave woman, never in there did they say, let's talk to God about this. Let's see what God has to say about this. We don't see this in this story either. The man who just had encountered God, and John did a good job last week. Just a chapter earlier, he's wrestling with God. He's in God's presence. Crisis hits. God's nowhere to be discussed in this story. So what I think is that dysfunctional fruit grows where the sun with the no doesn't shine. Anytime that Jesus, the Son of God, or God is not in the story, not in the planning, dysfunction grows. It's like mold, it's like fungus that grows in the dark. And healthy fruit grows in light and in the sun. So does dysfunction. Dysfunction grows where we don't allow the Son of God to shine. A guy named Jim George says, the Christian family is under attack on all fronts. Christian marriages are disintegrating at an alarming rate. Children are not receiving the proper training and modeling from their Christian parents. And from my perspective, a major contributor to this tragic slide is usually a husband and a father who is not assuming his God-ordained role as spiritual leader. That's where it starts and stops. That was God's plan from the beginning, that the man, and again, this is not to minimize the role of mothers and women in families, but the men were there to be the spiritual leader and nurturer of that family. So my question is does anybody experience that? Like I said, I talk to people all week long, and it's becoming clearer and clearer and clearer to me that unless the man of the house, the father in the house, is fully committed to God and being the man that God wants him to be, chances are there's brokenness in this family. That was God's plan. So one way to think about it, and again, this is about me, not you, is wives. How many of your husbands are missing today? Moms, how many dads are missing today? Dads, where are your family today? It's a question that we all have to wrestle with. Are we leading our family spiritually, or are we asking somebody else to do that? Or do we care at all because we're more concerned just with our spiritual journey? But dads, it's important to lead families well. Wives, it's important to equip and empower the men in your life, saying, look, we love you, and we just need you to seek after God, because that's what God wants for this family. This is, I grew up outside of the faith completely. And until I began seeking after God, I wasn't a good role model. My son ended up just like me. Even though I'm trying really hard with Adam, his next brother's sitting in prison right now because he turned out just like me, because I didn't step into that role that I was supposed to be in. Probably hurt 2 marriages, obviously. I'll raise my hand to my part in failed relationship. It's partially probably my fault. I would take responsibility for the fact that my 2 older kids don't want to spend time, not only spend time, but even return a text message to their father, because I didn't take the role that I was supposed to take in their lives. So then how do we become, after all of that, how do we begin to bring spiritual and emotional health over our dysfunction? How do we do that? So let's read Genesis 35, the first 7 verses, and look at how we do that. So it says, then God, so God wasn't acknowledged at all in the very first sentence. The very second word of the new chapter says, then God said to Jacob, go up to Bethel and settle there, and build an altar there to God who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau. So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, get rid of the foreign gods you have with you, and purify yourselves and change your clothes. Then come, let's go up to Bethel where I will build an altar to God who answered me in the day of my distress and who has been with me wherever I have gone. So they gave Jacob all the foreign gods they had and the rings in their ears, and Jacob buried them under the oak at Shechem. Then they set out, and the terror of God fell on the towns all around them, so that no one pursued them. Jacob and all the people came with him came to Luz, that is Bethel, in the land of Canaan, where he built an altar and he called the place El Bethel, because it was there that God revealed himself to him when he was fleeing from his brother. So clearly we see a whole different character of Jacob in this story than the first story. It's almost like a complete 180. A guy that had abdicated his role, a guy that was worried about himself, a guy that had a low commitment or a half-hearted commitment, all those things, all of a sudden, you see when God comes back into the picture, it's a completely different Jacob. So what can we learn from this? One, the first thing we have to do is recommit to God's plan for our lives. We got to be honest with ourselves. Where are we? And are we following God? Where areas do I need to recommit in? What areas do I need to bolster? A woman named Mizra Galib says, all through my life I made the same mistake. The dust was on my face and I kept wiping the mirror. You think about that. We're so quick to say all of these other problems, all the things we're facing are somebody else's fault. It's not my fault. I don't have any responsibility in this. But it's saying, she's like, there's a problem there, but the problem wasn't me. It was clearly just a dirty mirror here. Another one that I like comes from an unknown author that says, how can I blame the wind for the mess it made when it was me that opened the window? It was me. I brought this dysfunction into my house. I brought this dysfunction to my children. I can't blame them for how they grew up if I was the one who made them like they are. And Carl Jung says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. It is what it is. This was not my fault, because I'm just not becoming conscious of my own faults. So again today, my prayer for you all is that you would just be honest with yourself. Stop hiding, stop worrying, and just be honest. And recommit to God's plan. Why? Because Hebrews 14 says, nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give an account. He knows. He knows where we're falling short. We just need to be honest. He already sees it. And Deuteronomy says it this way. It says, so be careful to do what the Lord has commanded you. Do not turn aside to the right or to the left. We know what God has commanded us to do and who he's called us to be as men, as fathers, and as human beings. And he's saying we're not to deviate from those things. When we begin to deviate, that's when we allow dysfunction to reign. That's when we allow it to peek back into our parenting, to our grandparenting, to our friendships, to our work life. It'll just come right back in when we deviate from God's plan. The second thing, I'll speed up. I tried to tell them we would be done early. It doesn't look that way, guys. But we'll be done. I promise we'll go quickly. Second thing he did was said, you get rid of the other gods. A guy named Peter Drucker, who works in the Silicon Valley, he's a business manager. He says, tell me what you value and I might believe you. But show me your calendar and your bank statement and I'll show you what you really value. We all have things in our lives, little g gods. We all have them. It could be success. It could be money. It could be activities. It can be things that you do for fun. It can be anything that begins to become more important than God becomes the little g gods in your life. They're things that rule you. They're things that you always fall back on instead of God. These are the little g gods. And Jacob tells them we need to bury these things. Put them to death. Something that's buried, except for Lazarus and Jesus, don't come back from being buried. And neither should the things that you have recognized rule you that are not from God. This is a verse everybody should know. Joshua 24:15, that says, "But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorite," and I would say the gods that rule you now, "in whose land you are living." But you got to make this decision if you're going to be a good man, a good father, to say, "But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." That's what we have to do. We're not going to serve anything else. We're going to serve the Lord, and we're going to serve it as a family. Which leads me into the third point. We need to take responsibility back for ourselves and our family. Frederick Douglass says it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And any of you that are married to broken men probably wish they would have been raised as healthy children, as strong, healthy children. I'm a broken man, and my wife will say that outright. That, you guys are all just broken men who just needed love and still need love and encouragement. But it's harder to fix a broken man. Sigmund Freud puts it this way. He says, "I cannot think of a need in childhood as strong as the need for a father's protection." Our children need us, men. And I threw this one in because I'm a Godfather fan. Any Godfather fans out there? Yeah, we're getting fewer and fewer because that movie's now like 50 years old. But the main character, Don Corleone, says, "A man who doesn't spend time with his family can never be a real man." Proverbs, train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he is old, he will not depart from it. But the question that lends itself is, that's wonderful, but who's training you? Are you training your child in the way that you were trained up, that you were raised? Are you plugged in here? Are you learning what training you're supposed to give to your children that they will not depart from? Or are you like my dad, who inadvertently, because we didn't have much of a relationship, trained me in the completely wrong path of life? So who's training you? Because in Renewal Ministries, they say your few years with your kids are life-shaping opportunity. It might feel right now as that it will never end, but it will end soon. Right now is your moment for enduring impact. There is more at stake for your child than getting into the best schools and the best sports and the best jobs. Your child has an eternal destiny. God has called you to train up your child to go to heaven. That is ultimately the way he should go. So how do you help your child? How are you helping your child? And C.S. Lewis says, "Children are not a distraction from the most important work. They are the most important work." So the last couple points. Number 4, as a man, we need to be strong and courageous. And that can mean all sorts of things. You think about Joshua 1, and thanks, Mark, for reminding me of these verses. He says, "Be strong and very courageous." How? "Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you." So we have to be courageous in doing what is right before God, what God has commanded us and what he has taught us about right and wrong, what he has taught us about how to follow him. We need to be strong and courageous and do that. Especially now, with all this other nonsense that's going on in the world that tells us that kids and people can just do whatever they want to do, and we just need to respect that. We just need to be okay with that. We just need to let them do their thing. No, this is saying be strong and courageous, families, in doing what God has told you to do. That takes courage. That takes strength. It also says, and this is something that is comforting, it says be strong and courageous, but don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged, because the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So in your parenting, as long as you're close to God, He will take care of you. You can be strong. You can be courageous. You don't have to be afraid of that because God is with you. Charles Kettering says, every father should remember that one day his son will follow his example instead of his advice. That's what I did, was I followed my dad's example. You know, I'm sure he would tell us, and I've told my kids, hey, don't drink, don't smoke, don't do drugs, don't commit crimes. But I have kids that have drank, smoked, do drugs. I remember when I used to tell my kids don't smoke, and I'm standing outside smoking a cigarette saying, you shouldn't do this. This isn't good for you. And thinking like, how are my kids going to take that seriously when I'm showing them as a father it must be okay because dad's doing it. You know, we're models for our children. Steve Chapman says, becoming a dad is one thing, but being a dad is many things. We have many responsibilities, dads, men. That's what being a dad is. The last thing, and then we'll get into time of communion, is we must build an altar in our home. There's a quote that says, where we have a tent, God must have an altar. And where we have a her house, we must have a church in it. We need to make our homes a place of faith. We need to make our homes where our kids can see, hey, we're worshiping God in this. We're not worshiping dad here. We're worshiping God here because dad is just a broken man that's seeking after a perfect God. And we're going to do this together as a family. And if you don't want to have church in this house, especially if you have adult children, that's unacceptable because this house is a church. Exodus 20, in a Message, you know, in between verses 22 and 26, God says, every place where I cause my name to be honored and worshiped, I'll be there myself and bless you. Are we making our homes a place where God is worshiped? Because it says if we do that, He will be there and He will bless that house. Or is this the only place that we worship? Is Sunday morning the only time that we worship as a family? That's why God is here and maybe not in our homes, because it's saying if you worship there, He'll be there too. So now, during this next song is a perfect time to just think about our commitments. Think about the things that we've fallen short on and how do we recommit to God? How do we make God, the altar of God be in us and in our homes? How do we begin to lead our family well, break the cycles of dysfunctions in our families and in our homes? That way, just like my prayer for little Adam, that maybe we can break this generational curse of dysfunction and maybe his children won't have to experience the things his brothers and sisters experience, his father, his uncles, his dad, his grandfather, and probably great-grandfather. We can change generational dysfunction. That's my prayer. I hope that's your prayer. So if you'd like to get up, please come and take your communion elements during this song. Go back and we will close in just a minute. Thank you.
You unravel me with a melody. You surround me with a song of deliverance from my enemies, till all my fears are gone. And I'm no longer a slave to fear. Oh, I am a child of God. Oh, I'm no longer a slave to fear. Oh, I am a child of God. From my mother's womb, you have chosen me. Your love has called my name. And I've been born again into your family. Your blood flows through my veins. And I'm no longer a slave to fear. Oh, I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. Oh, I am a child of God. And I'm no longer a slave to fear. Oh, I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. Oh, I am a child of God. Well, I am surrounded by the arms of the Father. I am surrounded by songs of deliverance. We've been liberated from our bondage. We're the sons and the daughters. Let us sing our freedom. Oh, 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 you split the sea so I could walk right through it. My fears are drowned in perfect love. You rescue me and I will stand and sing. I am a child of God. You split the sea so I could walk right through it. My fears are drowned in perfect love. You rescue me and I will stand and sing. I am a child of God. I am a child of God. Yeah, a child of God.
We are grateful that they're a child of God. Amen. How many are going to spend time with family this week? Some, you know. We're going to be breaking bread in our home Thursday night with our families. And Jesus broke bread with his family, the disciples, the ones that were with him. And he said that, this was his body, which was broken for you. And he said, do this in remembrance of me. And I wonder, without any prompting or thinking, when you're breaking bread with your family this week, if there's going to be any remembrance of him. Because Through him, just like that song says, we have freedom from bondage. And dysfunctional parenting, dysfunctional lives, a sinful life, the thing that Jesus gave his blood for to forgive us, are all fruits of just being dysfunctional. But he says, my body has been given to you. It's broken for you. That through that broken body, we would have wholeness in our lives. And so let's partake in the body of Christ. And we thank him for that. Or at least we should constantly be thanking for that. But then he said his blood was given for us for forgiveness. His blood is given for forgiveness of your sins, your past, your mistakes, the areas in your life maybe where you haven't been fully committed to him. He already knows. But he's saying, I forgive you. This blood that we take together is just that. It's him saying, I forgive you. So can we... Lord, I haven't been a perfect father. Lord, I didn't have a perfect father. At least I didn't know it yet. But Lord, you are a perfect father and a perfect example for every one of us to follow. You will be with us wherever we go. You promise that. You have sent your Spirit to live inside us to remind us of that. All we have to do is quit neglecting that. Cling on to that. Follow you. Let you lead us in the way of everlasting, your word says. So Lord, today I just pray that anybody that's here who has been honest and who has said, I've fallen short as a parent here. I have just followed the patterns of what I have learned, all the things that I have picked up in life, and I'm just using those, Lord, is to say today I lay those down before your feet and I pick your tools up, Lord. And the best way I know how, I'm going to follow you. And I know that you will bring health both to me and to my children and to my children's children. There's another quote, and I can't quote it, but I'll paraphrase it. It says, a good man is a man that plants a tree knowing he'll never sit under its shade. So, Lord, I just want to be the type of father whose maybe great-grandchildren that I may not meet, I don't know, will have a better life because of the things that I'm willing to change about myself today. That's what we want to be, Lord. Lord, we remember you and we thank you and we honor you through this entire holiday season. And everyone in attendance says, amen. God bless.